Let us now welcome our speaker, Jimmy from Santa Barbara.
You're a tall guy.
Thank you.
Thanks, right there.
All right, I'm Jimmy. I'm an alcoholic. Wow, thank you. Thanks, Samira, for inviting me down here. Thank you for staying here, even though you saw me sitting in that chair. I'm a grateful member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I love saying that. I got all the same fears, man. I don't know if that will ever go away. I still sit there and I have those old ideas, and I'm supposed to come up here and prove to you that I'm a man, that I'm a real alcoholic, and that I deserve to be up here. And thank God for Alcoholics Anonymous, because I've realized now that I don't have to do that, and it doesn't really matter what you think about it. I was asked to come up here, and I'm a member, and I get to share my experience, strength, and hope. And some of you will get it, some of you won't. I am very grateful to be standing, breathing today. Talking to somebody else, I love sponsorship. I love working with sponsees because it takes me back to where I came from, and I love this time of year. My sobriety date is January 14th of 95. And I love this time of year, man. It brings me back. It gives me the chills, I remember waking up on rooftops in Santa Barbara. It's where I did all my drinking. And at 3 a.m, just freezing, just shivering because it was so cold because of the ocean breeze in winter. And just praying to God that He'd, kill me or let the sun come up, And I hated those, and it didn't matter how many blankets I had. That happened every single night, and the sun would come up and I'd crawl off the rooftop into the local park and pass out in the grass where it was warm. And sometimes it was good. Sometimes I'd wake up with that homeless sunburn where it's like half the body, let's go back to the beginning. My mom met my dad. My dad was, my uncle tells me my dad was known as Indian Jim. My mom met him in Vegas. He was, this was, 74, 1974, and he was a pimp, he had a big purple brim velveteen hat and full purple velveteen suit and Cherokee Indian that my mom tried to rescue, I guess. My sister was born in Las Vegas, and when she was pregnant with me, they moved out to Escondido, and I was born in Escondido. And at 18 months old, my mom moved me back to Santa Barbara, and I have 8 generations in Santa Barbara, and you'd think that with that I'd have something in Santa Barbara, but I have one of those families where they've somehow survived in Santa Barbara with nothing for this long, and I moved up there, and so I try and think of. I remember growing up trying to remember. I had pictures of my dad and me sitting on a car. I guess my dad's car, and I can't remember. I have memories, but I don't know if they're memories or just memories of seeing the pictures. I don't remember which, and so. I grew up in Santa Barbara with a single mom, 2 kids, and she went to school and worked 2 jobs in order to stay up there, and wasn't around much, and so she got onto the waiting list to get into low-cost housing, and when I was 8 years old, we moved into low-cost housing on the east side of Santa Barbara, and I was, one of the only Caucasian kids in a predominantly Mexican neighborhood, and hopefully the only time I swear, and I'm going to do it even knowing I shouldn't. But I took a lot of ass whoopings, that's just the way it was. And I had to learn quickly how to survive there. So as a single mom, I still trip out. I have two boys, my walking, breathing karma, and a wonderful wife, and those boys are great. And it's hard being, married, two parents raising kids, and I just don't know how my mom did it. And one of the things she did everything she possibly could. I went through a little stage where I blamed my mom for a lot of stuff, and if my mom was only, this, and and she worked all those jobs and did all this stuff in order to keep food on the table and not go on welfare. And we did do Catholic charities to get clothes and did some of that. And my mom made it a point that she made sure to cook us a big meal in the middle of the month, and because the kids that were, getting federal support, weren't getting a check in the middle of the month. They're getting it in the beginning of the month. And look, we got to still eat a full meal because I'm working. And she's trying to teach us something. After a few fights, my mom did everything she could to give me all my spare time outside of the neighborhood. And so I joined. I was put in the Santa Barbara Boys Choir up in Santa Barbara. And I loved to sing, and so I started singing, and I was soprano, and I became one of the head soloists for the Santa Barbara Boys Choir, and we were on TV, and we sang everywhere, and we went all over Europe, and did a bunch of stuff. And for a kid from the neighborhood, it was crazy, and I got to leave Santa Barbara, which a lot of my friends didn't do. They didn't leave Santa Barbara, and so I did that, and I think I started drinking for the first time when I was probably 11, and it was hanging out in the neighborhood. Mom was off at work or somewhere, and I remember as a kid, I first hung out with the boys as they drank, and then I became the kid that would use a lighter to light the bowls as they smoked in the back, and eventually I just started drinking with them, and it's not like it was some big deal for me, it was just trying to be part of the neighborhood. And I remember, I guess that wasn't really my first drink. I remember looking back, now that I've been sober for a while, looking back at some of my first times drinking, as I remember singing for the Santa Barbara Boys Choir. I used to do a lot of evening services and stuff, and do Catholic masses and sing for those. And I always remembered, I loved singing for Mass because I knew that communion was coming, and I couldn't wait because it was the time I got to have a little bit of wine, and I remember being a kid. I really remember the resentment of, just the body and not the blood. Who thinks of that? Why would you even offer up the body if you didn't have the blood, and so the frustration going back now with Cottonmouth and there was no blood, and it's the only reason I went up. I wasn't even Catholic, and they did everything they could. They put me, singing in choir. A lot of the parents sponsored me to go to private school, and they pulled me out of Franklin School and sent me to Notre Dame up there, and I remember sixth grade. I don't know how I scraped by sixth grade, and starting seventh grade, my voice was starting to change, which was a big deal for a kid that was singing everywhere, and now it was cracking, and I didn't know how to make that stop, and I didn't want to go sing in boys choir anymore. And my mom would drop me off at Notre Dame school to go to school in seventh grade, and I'd jump on the bus and I'd go out to the airport and I'd watch planes take off all day, and then I'd go take the bus back, and ditch the person that was picking me up to walk back to the neighborhood and go drink. And after a while, they kicked me out of private school. My mom said, I'm not going to let those parents continue to pay for you to go to private school if you're not going to show up, and I don't know what's going on. And so, of course, they throw you into therapy. And I was doing therapy, and my mom put me into public school, which for me now at this time, I was starting to kind of get accustomed to the neighborhood, and I was a klepto. I think the first time I got caught stealing, I was 9 years old, and I went into Smith's Food King when that was around, and I got caught shoplifting. I was on my roller skates with a backpack of like a 6-pack of Pepsi, some beef jerky, and Oreo cookies, and my grandmother had to come, and I have just a crazy family, My grandmother wasn't my kids have, they grow up in an alcoholic home, a sober alcoholic home, but it's still an alcoholic home, and they have like 5 grandmas, they don't. Slowly, they're starting to understand what that is. My 15-year-old gets it now, but they all have 5 grandmas because they got my mom, my wife's mom, and then, the sponsor and the surrogate mom, and as it goes on, and they all love my kids. My grandmother, my mom swore she never hit me, and the only time she ever came close was she pinned me down on the ground so my sister could whoop me. And that's because I pulled a knife out on her, And so that's the only time. But my mom swore she'd never hit me. And so my grandmother, would swear to God, would keep a checklist. And I think part of it was my grandmother hated my dad, And so I was a representation of that. And so I'd go to grandma's house, and I knew that the minute I messed up once, that list would come out. And she bought cases of wooden yardsticks, and just break them on me. And so mom wasn't around. Grandma had to pick me up from shoplifting at Smith's Food King, and that was a pleasant experience. And I just learned how to shoplift better, And don't wear roller skates. At Santa Barbara Junior High, my second year of 8th grade, everybody went to high school, and I stayed at Santa Barbara Junior High. And I did what we do best, and I was drinking and smoking at this time. What's phenomenal to me is that wonderful thing in the book where we think that our alcoholic life is normal, is the normal life, And at 14, I was drinking half a fifth to a fifth of Jack a day, and that was just standard protocol. And then anything else that came along with that, if somebody went and got 40s, we had 40s. And if there was other stuff, there was other stuff. And I always had that Jack Daniels. And, I was a klepto. I sponsor a lot of young people because I got sober young. And pills is a big deal. Lots of heroin right now. And for them, their description is drugs they're just easier to get. And I didn't understand that. Drugs took work. Like, I had to hustle. I had to do... Alcohol, I just stole, And so it was easier for me. But I also have to remember that was now, that's 95. So that was like late 80s, early 90s. And that was when, they still had the liquor rows in the back of the store, away from the cash registers. And so it was a lot easier for me to do it then. And so I'd go in there, 90 pounds with really big clothes. And and all I remember is that you could, undo your belt and open up the big pants and put a fifth and a 1.75 liter bottle of Jack, tighten up the belt, and then just hope you didn't clang as you walked out. And that's how I drank. I mean, literally, I drank a lot, and I had to pay a lot of that back. But drinking was easier for me. It was easier to come by. So at second year of 8th grade, I got kicked out of Santa Barbara Junior High because my truly was somebody else's stuff. But some kids got caught getting loaded behind the backstop, and as they were being escorted into the building to the principal's office, a guy handed me his stuff, and I said, "I'll take care of it so that you don't get caught." And in my head, I was like, "Fuck yeah, I'm gonna go get loaded!" Haha. And for some reason, they ended up pulling me out of class after that, and shook me down, and I got popped for it, and so they kicked me out, and I had the option. It was rehab or probation. I mean, I'm 14 years old, so it's like I'm just smoking pot and drinking. It's not that big of a deal, And so I went to New Beginnings in Lakewood, California, in order not to go on to probation. And I saw that there was a sufficient substitute. I saw the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Fellowship's not enough. It's just not enough. I liked what you guys had. I didn't really do any step work except for some workbooks that they give you in rehab back then, and I did everything I thought I was supposed to do in order to stick around this deal and really to get out of rehab, to be able to come home. And so after 58 days and this 28-day turnabout, I guess my mom had good insurance, so they kept me there. And then when the insurance ran out, they were going to send me home. And probation and the counselor said, he's just not ready to go home. He's not done. And so they sent me to a place called Claire Foundation in Santa Monica. They used to have an adolescent house on Pico Boulevard. And I moved into this little adolescent house, and I was pissed and resentful because I thought I did everything I needed to do to go home. And so I was there for about a month, and we all decided to get loaded because it sounds like a wonderful idea, and we all got kicked out. And then they sent me home, and I was like, I should have done that from the beginning. And, and I went back to Santa Barbara, and I went back to to doing what I was doing. School was not a big deal. I went there to get loaded. I was now... At that point, I was now going to probation school, where, there's 15 to 30 of us, and the teacher and principal is our probation officer. And you had to get something like 150 good days, which means you had to be like a perfect angel, and you got a good day. Like, you couldn't spit, you couldn't say a bad word, you couldn't, huff or puff, you had to just be perfect, and I couldn't do that. And so I was there probably for 60 days, and I got like one good day. And I thought I was going to be there forever. And then I heard somebody say, hey, if you go to 3 AA meetings, it counts as a good day. I was like, oh, nice. So you get a court card, and if you're like me, like my weekends were spent in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, like getting signatures. I had to get out of that school, and I think, at least 80% of my good days came from court cards, and I got out of school, and, that's all, that's all the effects of my alcoholism. That's it. Like, all of it is, I got in a lot of fights. At 16 years old, we got kicked out of low-cost housing, which seems to be impossible to do. I mean, there's still crack on the front lawn, and so, in Santa Barbara, for a single mom raising 2 kids, getting kicked out of low-cost housing, you have nowhere else to go, and so my grandmother offered up my mom a place to stay, and I couldn't come, and so I went to living on the streets, and I was just drinking. I was doing a bunch of other stuff, but nothing, I was drinking that daily. That's what I was doing daily. And when I came across other stuff, I'd do it. And it didn't matter what it was. It's just whatever you had or whatever I came across. It didn't really matter what it was or if it was going to work. Just the hope that something else was going to work would be great. And I went to living on the streets, and probation was after me. They were knocking down doors at friends' houses, and I had a friend, I don't know why I'm sharing some of these stories, but I had a friend who got really wasted one night at his house, and he ended up passing away about a year ago due to heart disease, due to his drinking. His heart got too big for it to do what it was supposed to do, and he passed away in his sleep at 41 years old. He got plastered and passed out, and his older brother, who was my older brother pretty much growing up, he's the guy who you kick in the nuts, and then he'd beat you down, and then he'd pretend that you'd cry, and he'd come over and he'd kick him in the nuts again and run, and then he'd, anything we did, he'd be the one there. He was like the father figure, and he put makeup all over him, lips, the whole 9 yards, and the cops came and busted down his door, and we're looking for Jimmy, and Oscar stands up, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And the cops just start laughing. He has no clue what they're laughing about. And stupid drunks. And my biggest deal was I was going to get caught. So what was the next idea? I was a chameleon. Coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, I learned that I'm a chameleon amongst chameleons, that I try and change colors, and then you guys change colors. I can never, ever try and, be that. Like, I had to eventually become myself in Alcoholics Anonymous. But I was a choir boy who was then jumped into the East Side Gang and banged for a while, and then went and was homeless and went to State Street and started dealing LSD and doing a bunch of LSD and of course with that, when you're now on the run, you go to Dead Tour. Like, that just seems like the next best thing, and so that's what I did. I went on Dead Tour, and it was a nasty time on Dead Tour. It was nasty. It was 93 at the time, and DEA was everywhere, and it was a really, really sketchy scene, and and so I traveled around the States, drinking and drugging and ground scoring and trying to get what you had, and selling you bunk so that I could get stuff that wasn't, and doing what we do best. And I remember coming back from fall 93 tour, coming back from Boston, hitching a ride with some kids and just starting to go on one, like, I remember drinking to just stop all the guilt and shame and pain I had from some of the stuff that I did when I was drinking and drugging, and some of the harms I caused my mom and my family and some of the friends that were around. And it was the first time where it didn't matter how much I drank, I couldn't get away from reality. Like, it was just there. It was in my face, and I couldn't, it didn't matter how much I drank. It just wasn't going away. And people didn't want to be around me anymore, So I got into San Francisco. People got out of the truck and they just left. They didn't want to be around me, and so I hitchhiked back down to Santa Barbara and did what tough guys do and asked for space on my mom's couch, and I had lice, scabies, staph, and crabs all at the same time. And when you're on Dead Tour, and you try and get rid of bugs, they just come back, and after a while you just give up. You start giving them names, and it took so much work that it took away from drinking and drugging. It just took away from that. I didn't have time to deal with Nix or apple cider vinegar or all these other concoctions we'd try to come up with to get rid of those. I swear to God, they could survive a nuclear bomb. And so I had to tell my mom that I had all these bugs. Of course, I told her 3 days after staying on her couch, but and so I shaved every hair on my body. I had to try and figure out how to get rid of that. It was the only way I could think of, and it tended to work. Bleach and apple cider vinegar and no hair. And I stayed dry for a short moment, because I was just absolutely miserable. I felt restless, irritable, and discontent. And I had the impending doom. I knew what, incomprehensible demoralization really was about. And the self-pity was gnarly. And after about 5 days, it was coming up on Christmas, and my mom gave me a Santa Barbara News Press paper, and she says, this guy Paul, who is the father of another kid that was in the choir, wants me to give this to you and ask you if you know anything about it. And they had just got done doing a big, investigation on the seminary up there, and Santa Barbara Boys Choir was run by the head director of the St. Anthony Seminary up there, and he started the Santa Barbara Boys Choir to, in order to give himself a fresh crop of boys, and of course, the ages that he liked, once your voice changed, you couldn't sing in boys choir anymore. You'd have to go somewhere else, and that was the age he didn't like them anymore. And so it was, there were over 300 boys that he molested out of that, and so a lot of my drinking, like I still couldn't put it to drinking. There was something wrong with me, and as a kid, when what happened, I blamed myself for the way I reacted to what was going on, and there were all these other boys, and none of them were saying anything, and the same process was happening to them. And so maybe the way I was reacting to what was happening to me is different than what was happening to them, so there's something wrong with me, and then in my drinking, like I couldn't put it together as drinking. I just thought there was something wrong with me, like there was something mentally, spiritually, physically wrong with me, and I didn't equate it to alcoholism. I didn't understand. I didn't even know what that was. I mean, I joked when I was a kid, we're a bunch of drunks, we're a bunch of alcoholics, but I didn't understand what alcoholism was, and I didn't understand the disease of alcoholism. I didn't understand the maladies we had. So I had the maladies. I just didn't have anything to tie it to, and so I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And so I got this newspaper, and that's what was wrong. Like, it finally hit home. Like, it wasn't just me. That's what's wrong with me. And so I called this guy, and that was a sketchy deal, man. And I went and did whatever they told me to do. I ended up being the only kid under statute of limitations, and with 50 guys that had come out before me about this stuff, and the reason they did the investigation, all of them have had at least one of their perpetrators was the choir director, and so those parents grabbed onto me like their life depended on it. I was the only one that was under statute of limitations. Everyone else was a little too old, and so I came off the streets as a little drug addict, drunk, alcoholic kid, and started getting drug around to now the guys that once arrested me are now asking me questions like I'm their buddy, and I have no peers, like none of the people, no one my age. I was just surrounded by the parents of all these kids, and they were dragging me in front of DAs and detectives and this board of inquiry who, I had to tell my story to, and they could tell me whether or not it was true, which made no sense to me. And I started having to do this therapy, and I had no clue what was going on. I was spun out, and I just did whatever they needed me to do, and he was arrested, and they did a search of his house and found a bunch of stuff, his sexual autobiography, and they arrested him. They gave him less time than I would have gotten if they caught me with LSD. But and so that happened. He got arrested, and an attorney came to me and said, "Hey, the Franciscans want to give you a check. They want to settle a suit with you." And so, they said, "Here's $120,000. You don't go to court, we're done here." And I was like, duh, that's a stupid question, It was probably like a week before that happened. Like I knew I was supposed to go talk to this attorney, and about a week before that, I came across peers. I came across guys that had gotten off a Dead Tour again and were now back in town, and they were going to get some beer at Trader Joe's, and they asked if I wanted to go, and and I started drinking again, and literally a week before that happened, and then they offered me a check. And so as a good, street kid, you go put the check in the bank. You have a bunch of old people telling you what you should be doing with it, and it sounds good to drink. And so 4.5 months later, I'm broke again. I don't want to say back to living on the streets. Back to living on the streets broke. Even with that, I went to living on the streets. I don't know why you pay rent. Like, that makes no sense. I just did quantities, and it was a ground score for me, like I had no clue. I was 18 years old, and so for me it was a ground score, and so everybody got loaded. Any of the kids that I grew up with on the streets got loaded. Like, that's just the way it was in a lot. And it got to a point to, even with money, people didn't want to sell me drugs, which was stupid, didn't make any sense. And and people didn't want to be around me, even with drugs. They just didn't want to be around me. And I was no longer a happy drunk. I was an angry drunk. And I hopped around. I hitchhiked a little bit, and I ended up, coming to hitting a bottom, which I think the bottom I hit sober was worse than that bottom itself, And I came back to my mom. My mom said that I could stay. I stayed one night, and she told me I had to go. And I remember hearing about Newhouse after going to all those meetings with that court card. And it's one of the things I remembered was this Newhouse place, and it was a house where guys could stay. And I called them, and they had a bed in their dorm. And I went in there, and at this point, I had severe drug-induced schizophrenia. I couldn't talk. Literally, I couldn't talk. I'd drool, and I'd grunt, and I'd moan and nod. And I guess real quick, they and them, whoever they were, they were there, and they were watching me, and they could hear what I was thinking, and they were somehow controlling me. It had something to do with Indian Jim, somehow, because he was somehow connected some way. And you guys just didn't know that they were there. And I really needed you guys to know that they were there, but I couldn't tell you that they were there, because then they'd come and take me away. And so, I couldn't say anything that I thought if I thought it first, because then if I said what I thought, then they know that I knew that they were listening, and they come, like, it was crazy. So I thought too much, so I couldn't talk. And so somehow I got into the dorm, and they told me I had to go to a meeting a day, and I had to go to these mandatory meetings, and so that's what I did. And I remember standing on Haley Street trying to get to the Lano Club in Santa Barbara, and I couldn't step off the curb. My life had been filled with, if I would have left 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later, if I would have turned right instead of left, if I would have went straight instead of turning, and then maybe that wouldn't happen. And I stood on that corner, and I was shaking, and I was DTing, and I was scared to death, and I couldn't step off the curb, And so I'd start crying, and I'd turn around, and I'd go back to Newhouse, and the guys coming out of Newhouse would look at me and say, "What's going on, man?" And I couldn't say. I'd grunt, and they said, "We're going to the morning meeting at the Lano Club," and they'd grab me under my arm, and they'd walk me off that curb every single morning, and eventually I can't even say eventually, it seemed like right away, I go into this morning meeting at the Lano Club, and this little table that was by the door, I try to slide in on the chair, and these little old ladies, they're like probably 35 or something, would pull out a chair and serve me coffee, and they'd give me a cup of coffee, and I'd sit there, and I'd cry when you guys were laughing, and laugh when you guys were crying, and I shook it out there, and over some time, a guy gave me a book, and he gave me his name and his number, and I called him, and I knew of another guy that went through the seminary stuff that supposedly was sober in AA, and I tried to get in contact with him, and I start trying to whisper, and then I couldn't talk again, and I eventually met a guy up in Santa Barbara who was living on the streets and had a hell of a story, and had some of the same experiences I had, and I was able to start going over the book with him. And this girl, Chrissy, who was one of the ladies at the table, would stay after the meeting, and she'd sit there. And the guy at the Lano Club gave me a broom and says, "Hey, man, I need someone to clean up the Lano Club. Do you want to do it?" And I'd nod, and he paid me $5 an hour to clean the Lano Club, and that was like real money for me, and so I did that, and I stayed at the Lano Club all day long because I couldn't get off the curbs, and Chrissy would sit at the table, and she'd start whispering. She'd start talking to me, just talking. She didn't care if I answered back. She'd just talk to me. And then over some time, she finally would say, "It's okay, you can talk back." And so I'd start saying a couple words, and they wouldn't come and take me away. And she started teaching me how to talk again, and I started going through the book, and I started doing step work. And you guys cracked that shell just enough, you know what I mean? Like, you gave me enough of you guys showing up on a regular basis, showing me that you guys came from where you came from and somehow are living another life. And made me question that possibly what was going on between my ears was wrong. And it gave me Alcoholics Anonymous. It gave me God, It gave me the opportunity to do the work. And just because you guys showed up. Everybody, I still trip out because everybody that was at that table when I got sober are still sober to this day or died sober. And they showed up every single morning at 6:45 in the morning. And that's impossible for me right now with kids and everything. I don't... I was 19 years old. And they didn't care. I can't say that. There was Tex who had some kind of issue because he had seizures because he was like a straight Skid Row drunk from New York that drank way too much rubbing alcohol. And he's had these sayings that after you'd been there for like 6 months, you could finally understand what the hell he was saying. And he would always say, "I spilled more than you drank. Blah, blah, blah. Shut up and sit down." He kept me sober off resentment a little bit, but most of them, they didn't care, I was just another member of Alcoholics Anonymous to them, and I started doing the work. They told me to go to school. I went to school, My sponsor, I remember standing inside Vaughn's, and I couldn't make a decision. Again, I couldn't step off a curb. I was full of fear, and I couldn't decide between white bread or wheat bread, because if I chose wheat bread, then that means, my life's going to go on that path, and it's going to be miserable. Wait a minute, but maybe if that happens if I choose the wheat bread. I was like, I couldn't make a choice, and I'd start crying in Vaughn's, and I'd walk back over to where my sponsor was at Central Office, and he'd laugh at me, and he gave me a quarter, and he says, "If you ever have one of those decisions, just flip the quarter." And I went back to Vaughn's, and I stood in front of the bread, like immediately. I went back to Vaughn's, I stood in front of the bread, flipped the coin, grabbed the bread that the coin told me to get, bought it, and left, and I didn't even think about it. And I was like, holy shit, like it works, Now I look at it like, yes, the quarter was my higher power at the time, but it worked, But I gave my will and my life over to this over to the suggestion, really is what I come to find it, is the process. I gave it over to the process at the time, which is to do what he tells me to do because he's done it, and I went and did, I don't know if he's actually done the quarter, but it was a great suggestion, and I went and did it, and I didn't even think about it, and I was the happiest 19-year-old kid walking back to New York. I could have skipped, eating just bread, because it was like I had paid rent, and I finally had enough money to buy something of my own, with my money, and it was like legitimate, and So I didn't want this stale bread that they got donated to them at Newhouse. I wanted to buy myself a fresh loaf of bread, and I was stoked walking back to Newhouse eating that bread. And I didn't even think about it. I swear I stood there for 15, 20 minutes tripping on white bread or wheat bread, white bread. I don't even remember which one I bought, but I was stoked, And I went to school, and I got 10 minutes. I went to school. This is why I brought up the quarter. I went to school, and I still use the quarter to this day when I get in those stupid situations, where I get frustrated over things that really don't matter, like pink flyer, blue flyer, like who cares, but it's really important somehow. But, I was new, and I went to Santa Barbara City College. I took a personal development course because I didn't know what the hell I was going to be doing. And I did this personality test, and now looking at it, I realized I was like probably 8 months sober, and so my personality at that time probably meant nothing, but I took this personality test. There were like a million questions that then said, this is my personality, and these are the areas, the professions that match that personality, and so it was like computer consulting or accounting, and I couldn't figure it out, and so I flipped a coin, and I'm an accountant. Still am. Wow. And I never graduated high school. I still don't have a high school diploma, and I went to City College and I assessed in and I took all the classes they told me to take, and it was a lot of classes. I started English when reading and writing were like reading and writing, and then I did that for like a year and a half, and then it became English, and then I got a B at college level English, and I just did that because that's what you guys told me to do. And I learned how to surf, and I started surfing a bunch. I mean, I lived in Santa Barbara my whole life, and I never surfed. Like, I was, you just didn't, I don't know. So I started surfing, and I love surfing, and I'm a little chubby for that right now. It's a little more work at the moment, but, and I got enough credits, and I met her. Which isn't my wife now, but whoever, her, it should have been a date. I didn't know what dating was, I just know what taking hostages was. And, and I met her, and she went up to veterinary school in Davis, and I found Sac State. I went up to Sacramento, moved to Davis, and went to school in Sacramento to get my accounting degree. And I was there for 3.5 years and got my bachelor's degree in business administration, emphasis in accounting information systems, and I got out of that relationship because it was sick, and I wasn't going to any meetings. I moved, and you guys didn't. They said same people, different faces, and it's not. You guys didn't know that I was somebody. You guys treated me like I was new, and I was like, I got 3 years, like I'm somebody, and so I. Wasn't going to as many meetings and wasn't as involved as I was when I was in Santa Barbara, and Young People in Alcoholics Anonymous saved me, and I started going to Young People's meeting, and I was 23 years old, and there were guys, actually at that point I was now 25, and working with my sponsor in Sacramento, and those, don't call them as much as I ought to, and work only when I need to do the work, and those guys said, I don't care how you're feeling, you need to start showing up at Young People's meetings. There's people that are trying to get sober that got sober young, and you've been sober now for 6 years, and you need to show up, period. And so they started dragging me to Young People's meetings, and they got me involved with Young People in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they taught me another part of Alcoholics Anonymous. I just knew of one of the legacies, really. Knew a little bit about some traditions, but I didn't have any clue what concepts were. And they got me involved in the service work of Alcoholics Anonymous and general service and H9 and doing what I call grassroots Alcoholics Anonymous. We went up to Reading. The Alano Club wasn't letting anybody into the Alano Club that was under the age of 18 years old, and so we went up there for a dance because we heard they were having a dance up there, and we thought that's where young people would try and show up, and went up there, and young people did. They showed up, and they were told they couldn't come in, and so we went to Denny's with them and got them interested in Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, it's Alcoholics Anonymous, despite what anybody, Alano Club isn't AA. It's just a place that rents space to Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step fellowships, and that's not AA. And you're welcome in Alcoholics Anonymous if you say you're an alcoholic, if you say you're a member, and got them involved, and they started Ready Paw, which was, Reading Young People in Alcoholics Anonymous. They hosted, a year later, we went back up there, and they were doing their, first event as a Young People's committee, and they were doing it at the Alano Club, and the Alano Club was stoked that they were there, and I've been involved with the state conference, and now a bunch of different conferences I've been involved in, maybe a little too much, and I was involved with the 2005 ACUPA here, and I moved back to Santa Barbara, and I started getting involved. We started Santa Barbara Young People's, and I just loved doing it. It was a good place, at least for me and some of the young people that I know. It's a good place to learn about sufficient substitute, and it's not just coffee house sobriety. It's about, okay, here's your little coffee house sobriety, but what can you do with it? You guys are young people, there's parts of Alcoholics Anonymous where your service is needed, I'm sorry to say, even now, for me going to juvenile hall, those guys don't care what I got to say anymore. I got gray hair. What the hell is this guy doing here, And so to take in a 19-year-old into juvenile hall or up to Los Prietos and speak on panels, it's a bigger deal than me or Tim Whitcomb, who was my first sponsor going up there. They're like, who are these old farts, you know? And so, you know, they pumped the lifeblood of Alcoholics Anonymous back into me, and I've had it ever since. You know, I met my wife when I moved back to Santa Barbara, and she spoke at the 2005 AccuPaw, and, you know, when we became buddies, you know, and we hung out and talked smack and shared experience, strength, and hope, and our own service structure and what we've done in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we became road dogs, you know, and I was dating somebody and she was dating somebody. It was no big deal, and we just had a blast together. And then, you know, a couple years go by, and I'm not dating somebody and she's not dating somebody, and a mutual friend of ours took us off on our own, you know, and said, you should date her, and, you know, you should date him. I could totally see you guys together. And you know, and I asked her out on a date, and I was probably 10 years sober, and she said, sure. And I said, just bring, she had a 4-year-old boy, and I said, just, you know, bring your boy. And she's like, no, I want an adult date. And I said, okay, that's cool, you know, and got off the phone with her, and I was like, what the hell is an adult date? Like, is that different? Is that different than a regular date, you know? And so it took me like 3 months to call her back. That works real well. You know, and you know, we were married, we were engaged 4.5 months later, and pregnant probably a month and a half after that, and married a month and a half after that, and we've been married 10.5 years. And it's, you know, if not drinking is not what this is about, you know. I've had to learn that the hard way. It's not what this is about. This is about something different. It's about living with new ideas, new principles, and the result of that living is I don't drink. And you know, we're two street kids, man, and we have some horror stories, and it comes out, you know, and we get to raise these two beautiful boys, man. And I was 15 years sober, and the 4-year-old was now 9, and he just wouldn't go to bed. Like, it's 10 o'clock at night, dude. Like, you got to go to bed. And he just wouldn't go to bed, and he keep calling, like, oh, Mom, whatever. I'm like, dude, you just got to go to bed. You got school tomorrow. I got to work. We got this kid that's like now 3 and has been having tons of gastro reflux and vomiting in the middle of his sleep. This other kid, and like he was keeping us up because we weren't sure if he was going to choke on his own vomit, and so we were up every 20 minutes. And my wife would go in there, and she'd come out, and she'd just be pissed. Like, he just wants you to go in there to help him go to sleep. And I was like it's like he just needs to go to sleep. He just needs you to go in there and rub his back. And that's how all my molestation started, was the nightly back rub, you know. And I was like I can't do that. And I realized that now I was at a place in my sobriety in my life that this stuff that I thought I dealt with, which is crap, I thought I stuffed it long enough, that it wasn't affecting anybody. And it was a realization that some of that stuff was still affecting. I was reacting to some of that stuff. You know, like, I don't have issues because of, you know, what happened to me. It's because of the way I react to what happened to me that's the problem. And I was now seeing that my reaction was affecting other people, and I didn't see that before, you know. And so I had to go seek help, you know. And this poor kid, you know, I love him to death, you know. And so I had to learn how to rub his back, you know, like, you know, the process of, like, I can rub his back. I had to realize that the other guy that was rubbing my back wasn't rubbing my back. He was looking for more than that. And all I'm doing is rubbing my son's back. And it was a different story, and it was a trip. And I haven't learned how to be a dad because I don't know that, you know. I met my dad when I was 3 years sober before I moved up to Sacramento. And I knew him for about a year, and he died of abdominal cancer, you know. And I had to, you know, wipe his butt and, you know, help him pass pretty much. And kind of try and be the son that he never had before, you know. And so, Indian Jim wasn't so pimpish when I met him. I'm telling you, dude, it was, you live a specific life, and that's, man, the poor guy, and so I got to learn how to be a dad. And the only way I'm even able to function in life, and live by principles and learn how to be a dad and be a professional, in the healthcare industry is where I work, and I'm a financial analyst, and it's crazy, I'm really just a street kid, and you guys have taught me how to be a man, a member of society, how to show up. Despite what I think, I was going in for a promotion at work, and it's scary. It's so scary. I deal with like $1.5 billion worth of assets and investments. Like, it's crazy. And I had lice and scabies and crabs and staph all at once. I haven't thought about thinking, I haven't thought about thinking. That's pretty good. I haven't thought about drinking. I haven't thought about drinking for a long, long time. And I've buried a lot of kids. We just lost 2 in Santa Barbara, like within a month and a half of each other. Both of them hung themselves. And I always say, like, it's a good alcoholic hanging. Like, he could have just stood up, He just had to stand up, but he didn't. I'm so very grateful for the guys and the women that stuck out their hand when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and sat me down at that table and gave me coffee and taught me what the spirit of Alcoholics Anonymous truly was, enough to where it would crack me just a little bit to open up the book and start doing the work. If you're new, I didn't just get this by osmosis. I sat down with the guy and I went through the book, and that's what I do on a daily basis. I go through the book with some guy, and find themselves in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and be able to get to a place to where they can start off with that whole, admitting to their innermost self they're a real alcoholic. That's a big step, man. It's a big, big step. And from there, you have no other option but to do this deal or die. So I'm very grateful for being invited up here. I'm very grateful for my sobriety. Hopefully my wife will come down here. I was on the conference with Myra. That's how I know Myra. And I'm really just, a regular miracle story of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm nothing more, nothing less, and I pray to God that some of you guys grab onto this thing. That's it. Thanks.